Great action here. Some of the world's best sailors on board. Top performing boat. Look at that France 81, the big foil. Whoa, the boat flying out of the water.
Good morning from Weymouth and welcome back to the 2019 Volvo European Championships. We are here for a great day of racing. I'm Jenny Tulloch, joined by gold and silver medalist Hannah Mills and yachting journalist Andy Rice, and it is going to be spectacular racing today. We are hoping to see 149er men's race this morning, then gold medal racing this afternoon. Hannah, the forecast for today.
Yeah, it's going to be a really challenging day to get that 49er men's race in, unfortunately. We've had a northerly breeze this morning. It was pretty good earlier on, but the forecast is for that to die and then swing round and start hopefully filling in from the southwest. Quite a typical thing here in Weymouth for that to happen. Unfortunately, I think it's dying a little bit too quickly, the northerly breeze, so we'll have to wait and see if we can get that 49er last fleet race in.
We know we did just see them leave the dock a bit earlier. We went down, did a dock walk with them. Andy, how do you think the guys are feeling looking into today, especially after yesterday's really interesting racing?
Well, in terms of how they look, I'm always impressed by their game faces. You can't really tell what they're thinking, and that's the sign of a good athlete, not really giving away what their internal turmoil might be. But I didn't see any turmoil out there. They look pretty relaxed. Pete Burling and Blair Tuke, they should be. I mean, they've got a pretty decent lead on the boats behind them, but there are other boats out there that would really want to get this final Gold Fleet race in, give them a chance to have another opportunity to attack the podium before they go into the medal race this afternoon. So it depends really where you are. Are you overperforming on your expectations or underperforming? And if you're underperforming, you want that last race. But if you want that last race and you're going to start complaining, then you're being greedy, because they've already had 19 races this week, which by recent standards at other regattas, Hannah, as you well know, is a healthy bunch of races, isn't it?
It's an awful lot of races, Andy. I think no one can complain about the amount of races this week. I think that's maybe a record 19 races for the 49er fleet at any regatta. I don't know, but it's an awful lot, and I think absolutely we've had such a range of conditions this week. We've had wind and waves, light winds at the end of the week, flat water. So yeah, it's been a true test of everyone's abilities in all conditions. So going into the medal race, I think it's a fair fight, and yeah, everyone should be pretty happy.
Yeah.
Yesterday particularly was a tricky day for so many of the teams out there. We were lucky enough to get to watch all three fleets in the broadcast, so if in the in-between time here you have some time to spare and you want to, go back and look at yesterday. But particularly some of the top teams really not performing in the light and shifty yesterday.
Well, none of the teams managed to get all their three scores inside the top 10. And the closest that came to that were Will and Sam Phillips from Australia. They got 11th, 3rd and 1st, so they got better throughout the day. They're not even particularly known for light air's performance. They tend to prefer the breeze. But those Australian brothers had the best of it. And then if we look at the top few, Pete Burling and Blair Tuke, 3-6, very respectable. Last race of the day, 19th. Dylan Fletcher and Stu Bithell in second place, 7th, 12th, 14th. We thought that was a fairly lacklustre day, actually. That was one of the better days. So it just goes to show how difficult it was. And for the Spanish, those Spaniards charging in on the port hand ley line seemingly all day long, and giving themselves some work to do, and some 360 penalty spins at the top of the course, 6, 15, 16. So they slipped down a little bit. They're just a point behind Dylan Fletcher and Stu Bithell, and at the moment a real battle lining up for bronze and silver between those two, but James Peters and Finn Sterrett with 9-1-11, they had a very good day yesterday, so the second British team knocking on the door of getting onto the podium as well.
I mean, it's interesting. You really don't think a 7, 12, 14 would move you up into second place for the day, but I think Dylan and Stuart, you said it at one point, Hannah, you said, oh, they'll be happy with today. They haven't made major mess-ups, and I think to see all three of the top teams actually dropping their final race of the day yesterday just shows how tricky it was. On all the race courses as well. It wasn't just the 49er men's race course that was tricky. We did watch the Nacras and the 49er FX as well, and there were deep scores everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely everywhere. You know, a really light wind day like we had yesterday, sort of 3, 4, 5 knots, always shakes the leaderboard up no matter what point of the regatta you're in, because it is just so tough. And you know, when you get light winds and you get stuck on one side of the course and the wind drops a little bit and fills in from the other side a bit more, you can't get there. You're just stuck. So yeah, it's super challenging as a sailor and pretty stressful, to be honest. They will have all come in after yesterday mentally pretty exhausted.
I think particularly the Nacras, we saw them at the end of the day. They were the final race we watched in the broadcast. It was late in the day for them to be racing as well. They were postponed to shore in the morning, and you can sort of see the toll maybe in some ways that took. A 22 for the top guys who had almost not worse than 13th, so quite deep for the Italians, and maybe not quite the same awful score lines that we saw in the 49er men, but there were still some deep scores here, and yet the British with a 2-1-2, I mean, they really had an amazing day.
Yeah, I mean, Ben and Nikki really brought their game faces yesterday. I think it's been such a long week. You know, that was the 6th day of fleet racing, and as you said, they raced in the evening, and so they've been waiting around quite a lot all day, and that's a real show of sort of mental grit to come out and perform like that. But they love those conditions. They're really good when the wind's down a little bit and a bit shifty and tricky. Ben's always been known for his ability in that, and so yeah, to go out and do it at the end of a long week like that is really impressive to see.
I think in the low riding, non-foiling conditions, I think maybe there's a different boat speed pecking order as well. I think those that are really good at the foiling and keeping the boat on its knife edge when it's riding above the water, when you don't have that technical advantage, then you're back to more of a normal pushing water kind of race when maybe some of the other skills, the tactical skills, come more into play and less it's about the technical differences between the teams.
I think we saw that as well in the 49er FX. We saw a number of deep scores for the top teams here. You can see the Brazilians, their final race of the day yesterday. Again, their throwout for the Netherlands team, the second to last race of the day. And yet, the rising stars, we've spoken about them a lot this week. The Swedes, they thought they were good in breeze, Andy. They told us when Vilma came in here, she said, you know, we need to learn how to sail in light air. But to score a 9.33, they're not doing badly in light air at all.
No, they learnt pretty quickly in that first race, didn't they? I mean, 9th wasn't too shabby to start the day with, and then when we were watching them sitting in those top 3 positions in the other races, we were sort of thinking, I think, for a while, well, you know, how long can they hang on for before other people go past them? But they didn't. I mean, actually, the races spread out quite a bit as well, so they were relatively easy races to defend in some ways. But and actually, Hannah, I think you picked out some of the technical differences in how they were sailing the boat with the helm sitting in, or maybe it was you, Jenny, I can't remember, but that they were maybe not looking as comfortable in those conditions in terms of how they were spreading the workload between the two, but it seems to be working for them.
Yeah, I think in many ways they nailed the race course. I mean, Hannah said, looking at it, she's like, it's often really good to go to the left side in this race course, and particularly the Swedes and also the Danish team who had a 4-1. So both Denmark teams, but Denmark 7, Ida Marie and Marie, they had a great day. And to have a UFT, unfortunately, but then a 4-1, it was a good day for them. And it was that left side ultimately, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we saw the top left come in time and time again on that race course. It was more about how you got there without ending up stuck in the pack or stuck on the ley line with a load of boats taking your wind. So yeah, they did a fantastic job of that, and I think that those Swedish girls, I think, you know, we commented on how they were sailing the boat that day compared to some of the other teams, but actually maybe for them right now that is how they should sail the boat, and keep the helm quite static and let the crew do the movements, because if you've got 2 people not entirely sure of how best to sail the boat, then it might be really bad. But at least if you keep one still and maybe let someone else do it. But
Then you can make better decisions.
Exactly,
maybe.
yeah. So they'll figure it out, but it was really, really impressive yesterday from those girls.
Well, what you're seeing now is the 49er men's gold fleet, and we said that we were hoping for one race this morning to finish out what would be a very long series. I think that's 19 races for the men. But as you can see, not quite as much breeze as there was earlier today. Maybe that one black spinnaker. No, really, that doesn't look good for any of us, does it? So they haven't yet canned this race. They would otherwise we'd be seeing them sailing in. So we will try to hang and see what the race committee decision is out there. We know David Campbell-James has done a really good job this week. I mean, they've gotten off so many races.
Yeah, and the feedback from the sailors has been that this has been one of the best managed events that they've been at, and it's been a really welcome return to Weymouth and Portland for a lot of these sailors, some of whom were competing at London 2012, and they really enjoyed the build-up regattas to London 2012. So I think Weymouth and Portland have enjoyed hosting this international fleet this week, and I think these sailors will be going back home to their respective countries saying, we really need to come back to Weymouth more often.
Yeah, I think we've said it was varied conditions. It was so windy earlier in the week. It's almost like you can't not have this one race let go by light air. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the full complement of varied conditions. So maybe it's just letting the other teams have a little break while the breeze. What was the forecast, Hannah? It is meant to fill in time for the gold medal racing this afternoon.
Exactly, yeah. So this was fully in the forecast for it to die. I think it just happened a little bit sooner. For once, Weymouth is maybe a little bit too hot. I think if it stayed colder this morning, then the northerly would have held. But yeah, it's sunny outside and heating up quickly. So that died. And yeah, expecting the southwesterly to come in, hopefully sooner than we predict. We're predicting about 1 o'clock. So yeah, hopefully it'll fill in soon.
Okay, so some of the questions out there haven't necessarily been speaking about this week. We've been speaking, and you and Ben have been speaking in the Magic Marine halftime show about some other big decisions happening in the UK at the moment. Andy, can you talk us through what's going on there?
Yeah, well, the mid-year meeting for World Sailing taking place up at Chelsea Football Club, where the politicians in the sport are discussing the future of the sport and particularly the events and the equipment that we might see in future Olympic regattas. I would say the headline from yesterday was the recommendation 9-3 by the Equipments Committee, I think it was, for the RS Aero to replace the laser as the single-hander for the men and women in the Olympic Games. I think that's a really interesting. You could say it's a progressive decision. I think it's got its pros and cons, and as I said yesterday with Ben, I think that the challenge, if the RS Aero were to be ratified as the new Olympic class, is can it maintain its strong following with its weekend warriors, because it's come from nowhere in 5 years to be a really popular new boat. It's a really nice single-hander to sail. Are they going to be able to keep those people happy whilst dealing with all the specific challenges of being an Olympic class as well? That's my concern for them. And I will sort of feel sorry for the laser if it does go, because I think it's served a really good purpose in the Olympic classes. But the whole organisation of that class and the building and all that mess, I mean, it has been an awful mess, and that has left an opportunity for someone like the RS Aero to come in and replace them. So if it does happen that way, perhaps in part Laser have brought it upon themselves.
Okay, so that's the laser. The 470 for the next quad has a bit of a change up as well.
Yeah, it does. It's, I think, again, kind of been ratified yesterday as the only option for the double-handed class, and yeah, the plan is to go mixed with the 470, which I personally think is a fantastic choice for the class. I think as a boat it really lends itself to be mixed. I think you can have female helms, male helms. I think it'll work really, really well for both sexes to do either roles on the boat. So I'm really excited for that for the 470. I think it's a welcome change, and I think for the class it'll be really good.
Okay, well, that is World Sailing. I think there's more recommendation. There's more going on in council today, so we'll probably have slightly more updates later on. But it does sound like at the moment the 49er men are not necessarily racing. They are still being held on the water to see if the wind comes in. So we will hold here as well. Make sure, if you can't, just stay tuned into us to come back at 2 p.m. for the rest of the racing. Otherwise, we will definitely let you know the second that the 49er men start racing this morning. Welcome back to the Weymouth and Portland National Sailing Academy and the site of the final day of racing of the 2019 Volvo European Championships. We had a slight delay this morning to the final race of the men's gold in the 49er, but hopefully now we are going to see racing. I've got with me Hannah Mills and Andy Rice. I'm Jenny Tellick, and we are really excited to watch what's going to be maybe an epic final 49er race before we get into the medal racing this afternoon. So Hannah, what's happening out there?
Yeah, so we had the northerly breeze this morning that we knew was going to die at some point. It died pretty quickly, so unfortunately the 49 has been waiting out there for a while, but it's now filled in from the southwest. It's really light, as you can see out there for these guys. It's about 3 or 4 knots, but we're inside Portland Harbour, and so it's flat water, so hopefully we'll still be able to get off and a good race on the way.
You can just see here, Andy, we're out on the race course. There was glass earlier, so the fact that it's looking light, this is much better, and we are inside. You've got the orange flag up. We are inside 5 minutes at the moment.
Yeah, and if we were at other venues in the last few months, we might have been saying this was a breezy day. So we should be grateful for what we've had earlier this week and thankful that we can get racing away today as well, because that will be a whole week of really intense racing that the sailors have managed to do here, and they've really appreciated the race management, the slick organisation here at Weymouth and Portland.
We're just trying to get a hold of exactly how long they have to go. I'm going to say probably within inside 2 minutes here, Hannah, but what would you expect on this race course with this breeze condition to work out well?
I mean, I've seen where they've put the race course that's right at the bottom of Portland Harbour, quite far to the left. So often the bottom left is actually quite a risky place to be, because you can often get a lack of wind under Portland, which is a big landmass on the left, and then top left can come in pretty strong. So picking your patches of pressure to get across to the top left is probably what I'd be looking to do, but trying to maybe avoid that bottom left because it is quite risky.
It doesn't look like Jonas Warrer is lining up to avoid the bottom left. We've got Denmark 30. We spoke about him a little bit this week because he's a previous gold medalist on this class, although he's slightly struggling here in this regatta, not quite in the contention to make the medal racing at the moment. But that is the point here. It's setting up the final race to then see who can make it through for the medal racing. And Andy, it looks like it's close at the moment for 10th all the way, maybe even to 14th points overall to who's going to make the top 10.
Yeah, so that is the critical gate for some of those teams to be able to jump through, make sure that they're in the top 10 medal race later on this afternoon. So in 10th at the moment are the French, who were second of the world last year, Mathieu Frey and Noé Delpech. But 7 points behind them is Sebastian Schneider and Lucien Coujon. We're a minute inside the start. There's a bit of midline sag, but it's already looking extremely hard fought at this pin end, and pretty hard fought at the committee boat end as well. So a good spread of the fleet across the whole length of the line here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with it being this light, keeping the flow on the foils and keeping some momentum on the boat is going to be so important, because if you can hit the line running on the go up to speed, then you're going to be in such a good position to hold your lane and be able to make the first decision your own, which is ultimately what we're always trying to do when we get off the start line.
I think setting up for good position at that pin in the line is Dylan Fletcher and Stuart Bithell, GBR6. They had a decent day yesterday, a 7-12-14, put them into second place overall. They are very tight with the Spaniards right behind them, but with 10 seconds to go, the Spaniards are up the line. The Danish are looking good. It's going to be all about acceleration here. 3, 2, 1, that's the gun. Nobody really quite up to speed the way we would expect them to be, Hannah.
No, I think they were all lined up so close to that start line that then it doesn't leave yourself much room to accelerate. But I think when it's this light, being on the edges is often a really powerful position. So I can kind of see why people are battling so hard for this pin end and for the starboard end, because there's often more breeze just pushing its way around the edges of the course.
So France 655, they already have to tack out into clear air. They were the most poked forward boat at the pin end, and it didn't give them any runway whatsoever.
I'm particularly impressed as well with Sweden 21 up the line there. Not the Swedish flag you see here, but about 6 boats up. They were so punched out from the rest of the start line there. I mean, they clearly were confident in their line sight. From about a minute along, they didn't have anyone around them. They were in the middle of the pack, and instead of sitting back with the line sag, they sat forward. Do you think that's just confidence in transits?
Absolutely, confidence in transits. They probably know that they need to put in a really strong performance in this race, and so they've gone for it. And I think we've probably had a bit of a left shift here because the pin end boats were starting to look like they were extending forward, and the whole fleet's pretty much flipped over onto port, which is often a key indicator of a left shift. And where the Swedish boat started, it meant they could get onto port really quickly because they didn't have anyone inside them controlling them. Whereas Dylan and Stu here, they had to wait for everyone else to go, but they look like they're in a really strong position now, and leading their way out back to the middle of the course.
So GBR6, the most left-hand boat as we see them, they didn't have control, as Stevie Morrison was talking about a couple of days ago. Hannah, how would you rate their control now that the other boats have tacked and they're all, that front bunch is on port tack?
Yeah, I mean, they're in a really lovely position there. You know, they can choose whenever they want to flip back onto starboard. They've pretty much sailed across most of the fleet heading out right. So even if we get a right shift now, I think the wind's gone so far left that they're pushing over those boats. So they've got all the options. They've got a couple of boats now starting to head out behind them. We can see here with a Swedish boat and I think a New Zealand boat getting a bit of leverage on that left-hand side. So for them, it'll be about at what point do they want to maybe go back and protect those boats getting leverage to the left.
On the right of screen, we see Will and Sam Phillips. They had the best day yesterday on that really tricky day. Almost got their scores in, all of their scores inside the top 10, but no one managed a perfect 10 in that respect. But they did win a race by a country mile yesterday. But Hannah, the two boats we're looking at here, your concern for them would be getting in too close to Portland at the bottom of the course, would it?
Well, I think the biggest concern right now is the fact that we've clearly have had a left shift and they've just sailed for quite a long way on starboard on a header, not sailing their quickest course to the mark, but perhaps they think there's more wind this top left and so they just want to get across there. So we'll have to see how that works out for them. But for me, I'd be a little bit heart in mouth knowing that I'm sailing on the short or the headed tag.
I think the only thing that'll go in their favor is if it just continues to go left and we don't ever see that right-hand side come back. But I think as we look out here, Hannah's point is accurate. Dylan and Stuart taking that lefty early, being on the lifted tack for so long, they're starting to look really good, at least at this moment in the race. Yeah,
absolutely. From where we're sat, it looks a pretty strong place to be, and I'd be so happy as those guys, knowing that you're controlling the right-hand fleet. It's a left shift. Everyone's below you on port, and yeah, there's not too many boats getting too much leverage out to the right of you. So yeah, you'd be pretty happy where you are.
And is that Denmark 30 we see in the middle of the fleet? So they came off the pin end right next to GBR6, who we've been saying is doing so well. And look at the difference now. They're so separated from GBR6. It's really hard to tell from this angle how they're doing up the track, up the ladder. But I get the impression that the Danes are sort of having to pick up, sort of get what they can get out of the racecourse, whereas at the moment GBR6 is dictating. They've got total control in terms of they got every choice available to them.
Yeah, I think we're missing GBR6 from that tracker, unfortunately, but yeah, I mean, as we can see, the long tack really is port tack right now, which is definitely showing a left shift, so we'll have to keep eyes out on whether they decide to move the next marks, which might help or change people's decision for a jibe set or a straight set. But yeah, really compact fleet, the sort of first bunch anyway, really compact.
And again, this is looking at the tracker on the live cameras, but if you want to look at it on your own and be able to rewind and zoom in on your favorite sailor, etc., you can find it on our event championship page on the right hand side. It says live tracker there. Just click in on the live race at the moment. You can see, you can go all the way back to the start, or you can follow a particular team. But as Hannah did mention, GBR5 not quite being tracked at the moment here. I think they're sitting just above Denmark 132, and they were still headed out to the right hand side when we saw them earlier. And presumably, if the tracker is accurate, here they are on screen, but coming up to that lane line shortly.
Yeah, I think they've still got a sort of 100 metres or so to go on starboard, but it looks like maybe we're starting to get the hint of a right shift coming back, because those boats on the right are maybe starting to extend a little bit, so they'll have to keep their eyes out for that. But I mean, realistically, they're going around in the top 5, so on a day like today with the wind conditions, you'd be really, really happy here with your positioning coming into the final third of the beat, where it's all about keeping your lanes clear and your nose just in front.
So a team we haven't spoken about yet on top of the leaderboard with 63 points to Dylan Stewart's 80 points this morning. But the Kiwis, they're deep at the moment, Andy.
Yes, they are. I wonder if we can see them. If you go from the British flag to the left to the German and then the French that's just tacking, I wonder if that's the Kiwis sort of middle left and quite distant in our picture, but they're sucking gas from some of the other boats. I think they're struggling to find clear air where they are. So really not very good from Pete Bowling and Blair Chuk. It's an opportunity for GBR6 just going into attack to take a few more points out of the Kiwis and maybe have a chance to attack for gold later on this afternoon in the medal race.
Yeah, and this is great for Dylan and Stu right now. You know, the Kiwis being a little bit deeper, you know, they're going to have a big battle on if they are sort of rounding 15th backwards, because it's so hard to overtake. When it is this light, it's really challenging being in the pack. It's slow and it's painful, and you just watch the leaders extend away from you. So yeah, it's going to be it's going to really hot things up if Dylan and Stu can consolidate this and get a good result.
And the interesting part is the leaders overall did score a deep score yesterday afternoon, the final race of the day. They have a 19th, so that's currently their throwout. So if they finish in a deep race here, they'll have to eat either the 19th from yesterday or the current race scores, and that really could mix up the leaderboard going into this medal race this afternoon. So if Dylan and Stu are able to take the win here, then they'd be on 81 points, and it's just a question mark as to how deep that score could be for Pete and Blair. This is not Pete and Blair. Below them, New Zealand 34. The winners overall are New Zealand 77, and I think from the tracker we see them about in the middle of the race course and about in 10th or 11th position. So perhaps if they stay in 10th or 11th, they'll still be winning, but only by 4 points, say. So really nothing in it. And as Hannah said, it's really difficult when you're back in the pack on a light day like this. It's not a guarantee.
Absolutely, yeah, it's really, really tough. And I think we're now approaching the sort of business end of this first beat. They look like they have spread out a little bit more. And again, as we saw yesterday, that's sort of a factor of these conditions. The first few get away, and then the next pack is just so tight. And it really is sort of, although it's light and sort of patient sailing, when you're in the pack, it's pretty heated, and there's a lot of jostling for position, and even in this light stuff. So it's going to be interesting to follow that.
This is shaping up to be quite a commanding lead, dare I say it, for GBR6, even in the early stages of this race. And I'm thinking it's not going to be too long before we see that Weymouth mark come into view. And this is about as comfortable as it gets in really what are quite tricky conditions, and always difficult to defend in these kind of conditions. But at the moment, you can't ask for much more than this from GBR6. And Dylan Fletcher just almost stretching his legs out there on the rack. I don't think we've seen Stu Bithell out of the front of the boat yet. He's tacking in front of the mast, so it is still very light conditions, but the boat motoring along quite nicely.
Yeah, I think this is a really well executed first beat for these guys. I mean, you know, they're in second place. They've got to go full on attack if they want a shot at the gold medal from Pete and Blair from New Zealand. And the pack behind's really close behind them as well in the points, in the overall points. So to sort of go out and have a real clear race strategy, which they did, starting at the pin, winning the pin, and commanding the left-hand side, I think it's really great to see them attack this race like that.
Well, heading into the top mark, it is GBR6, Dylan Fletcher and Stuart Bithell. They are continuing their march yesterday up the leaderboard from third to second today. As we've just said, they are fighting for that first spot, and this is a pretty commanding lead in just the first upwind leg of this final race of the qualifying racing, and they've got to be feeling a tiny bit of relief as they look behind them and do a pretty nice set, I would say there, Hannah. That was a beautiful execution for GBR6 with what's going to be about 10 boat lengths lead as they come around.
Yeah, that was really nice to see. You know, getting around that windward mark is all about getting the acceleration as quickly as you possibly can in this light stuff on the downwind. Obviously, the spinnaker's got to go up as fast as possible from the crew, but too much fast movement actually can really distort the sails in this light stuff. So it's all about being smooth, getting the kite up, and then putting that leeward heel, as we can see the Swedish boat do there, to then bring it flat and drive the boat forward.
So that's Sweden 21, Fritjof Hedström and Otto Hummel. They had a great start in the middle of the line. We talked about how confident they were in their transits, and I think being rewarded there with the second place around the top mark. Behind them, Sweden's Sylvan Ångmark also into the top 3. And then a very, very tight battle here. France, followed by Germany, followed by New Zealand, 18. Again, there are 4 Kiwis in the top 25, so a deep squad for them, but that's not necessarily the leaders overall as we look at the eagle eye view here, just trying to look through for New Zealand 77, and again, not quite seeing. There we are in 14th, 15th, coming in on Port Tax. So the overall leaders having a really deep score, and as we said, that might even put Dylan and Stewart into the first position, Andy, if they take this race.
That would be an incredible turnaround, because we really haven't seen Burling and Chuk slip on any banana skins until late yesterday afternoon. We see NZL 77 on Port Tack, just about to go into their tack. Fortunately for them, the yellow jerseys have got lots of clear space on the starboard ley line, so they're not going to have an incident going round there. But they've got an awful lot of work to do, and they've got a lot of traffic ahead of them. Traffic, of course, means opportunity, but not the best hoist there from the Kiwis either, and much better manoeuvre, I would have thought, by Denmark 30 going straight into the jibe set and straight into potentially clearer air, whereas the yellow jerseys, bottom of our picture, are really having to sail a long way around Australia 66 to try and get their clear air.
I think we haven't seen the Spanish boat yet in third place, Diego Botin and Iago Mara, but I think they're coming up now to the windward. Oh, there they are, coming in on port again. We saw that move a lot from them yesterday, and they've got a lot on in this race.
And the other boat on the right-hand side just floundering around. I'm not sure what's going on, but that's one of the leaders, Justus Schmidt and Max Boom. They're doing a 360 penalty and making a meal of it, because they haven't got great conditions to be able to keep the boat turning. So a disaster for Germany 59, only just managing to avoid France 2 as they make their way still towards the windward mark. So terrible for the Germans, who were lying, I think, in 5th place going into today. So one of the contenders for the podium, really struggling. So just when you thought it was terrible for Burling and Chuk, it looks even worse for the Spanish and the Germans.
You can see how hard it is if you're trying to make it in on that port ley line, and the fleet is actually setting straight. Yesterday we saw a lot of port ley line, but a lot of early jibing, so it was much more open to come in kind of in that spot that the Spanish really love. And yet here today, the Spanish coming through there in bad air, and the Germans coming through on port, essentially probably fouling someone on the downwind. And it's just an ugly spot looking upwind, Hannah. When you've got that going on, you've got everyone coming downwind and you're deep in the pack.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, what the really, really top sailors can do. And I'm sure most of this fleet can do it in their moment. But it's planning ahead. If you are deep in the pack, there's been a left shift, people are probably going to straight set, then that port ley line is going to be a really rough place to be. So sailing is all about planning ahead, particularly when you're back in the pack.
So not many have jibed off. We did see Denmark 30, the 2008 Olympic champion Jonas Warra jibe set at the same time as the Kiwis. It'll be interesting to see who wins that mini battle between the 2016 and the 2008 Olympic champions. The 2016, of course, being Pete Burling and Blair Chuk, with a lot of work to do. And with some of the front runners like the Kiwis suffering, it's the 2 British teams that are really making hay in this race right now. The race leaders, Dylan Fletcher and Stu Bithell, making a move maybe on first place. We'll have to see how it plays out, but also let's not forget James Peters and Finn Sterrett in 7th place in this race at the moment, also moving up into podium contention from being 4th at the beginning of the day. So the local 2 teams doing extremely well, and we see the race leaders there. The only boat in picture there is the clear illustration that they are so far ahead of the rest of the pack right now.
Yeah, and it's looking so light. I can't. I'm sure everyone who sails, who's watching this, knows how tough it is to sail in these light conditions when the fleet are all really, really good. Everyone can sail the boat well. The tiny details matter, and just keeping your nose clean. And it's easy for these guys right now. They've got no one around them. They can sail their VMG that they want to choose to sail, and they can look around and have a chat. But back in the pack, it's just so hard, because people are affecting your wind all over the place, and with only 3 or 4 knots of breeze, if someone's taking some of your wind, that's a big problem.
It leaves you with nothing.
Yeah.
Now, what's the greater concern, being caught by the other boats, or running out of time and maybe a race being abandoned in these kind of conditions?
I think, yeah, you're always in this light stuff thinking, well, are the race committee going to keep racing? And I think if it stays light like this, but the wind's quite steady, they'll continue for sure. But if it starts to get wacky and this light, then they'll certainly think about abandoning. But right now, for all these guys, they've got to just be in the frame of mind of we are racing until it's abandoned. We are doing everything we can to either win this race or claw back as many points as we possibly can.
I think for Dylan and Stuart particularly, you want to have this race win, and you want to, especially when you look behind and the Kiwis are deep and the Spanish are deep, and knowing that they both have deep throwouts. The Kiwis we spoke about have a 19th. The Spanish also scored their throwout at the end of the day yesterday with a 16. So looking back, all they see is these two Swedish teams behind them, and realistically that makes them happy, I think, and do everything you can just to stay ahead and let your competitors lie where they may. But if they lie deep, that's the best.
And that was going to be a simultaneous jibe by the two Swedish teams, but 21 we're looking at now decided if they're going to jibe, we'll carry on starboard jibe. So a bit of a giveaway with the kite blowing through from one side to the other, but now they're going into their jibe, just giving them a little bit more separation on their compatriots in the other Swedish boat.
Yeah, definitely. I think they knew they weren't quite at the ley line for either of those leeward marks, as we can see them just on the right of the screen there. So they knew that if they got jibed on, they were going to lose an awful lot of distance by having to come up really high and defend their lane.
Do you think it was actually a dummy jibe and they sort of knew that the attacking Swedish boat was going to do that?
Definitely it could well have been, because they know they were getting to that ley line, and for sure their Swedish teammates were going to jibe on them. So a dummy jibe's always a good sneaky manoeuvre before you get to that ley line, so you can pull out, carry on and get to the ley line without being jibed on. So yeah, if it was a really sneaky manoeuvre and worked really well for those guys.
Looking really soft for the leaders right now. Must be a little bit worrying. Stu Bithell, I don't think he's been behind the mast yet in this race. He's been sitting up in the front section of the 49er underneath the jib, and Dylan Fletcher almost standing in the middle of the boat now.
It's interesting as well to watch them sail downwind with so much leeward heel. The other teams were not heeling the boat in this vein. The other team, the Swedes that we saw particularly, mostly sailing the boat flat. So it seems like Dylan maybe likes the feel of the helm there, Hannah, with just a touch more tug on the rudder. Yeah,
definitely. You know, when it gets this light, you just want any sort of feeling through the boat, and that leeward heel just brings on a bit of weather helm and gives the helm something to steer to, because there's just no feedback otherwise, and you're kind of guessing. You know, he'll be relying a lot on Stuart for their angle to tell him how much pressure there is in the kite, and I think, yeah, they're just heading around that sort of turn left mark, so they'll be heading out to the right hand side of the course.
I'm not sure if I would say that that's the right call, just looking at how light it looks for them and how much breeze it looks like Sweden 21 has. Do you think we'll see them go to attack soon here and defend on that left-hand side?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, the Swedish are coming in with some great pace there, and if they can convert that through a jibe to go to the opposite mark to Dylan and Stu, they've opened themselves up to potentially really attack up this next beat. But it looks like they may be heading up, actually, and they're going to go around the same mark as Dylan and Stu. So they must have seen something we can't see.
And a good attacking move by the purple kite of New Zealand 18, Isaac McHardy and William Mackenzie, who look like they might have a chance of getting down here in third place. But then another one comes into view, Germany 3, also on the attack. So the boats that have done a jibe late seem to have gained on the boats that are coming in on starboard jibe now, and it's really closing up. And there's going to be a battle to get round for third, fourth, fifth and sixth places, which will all play into the hands of the front two as they stretch away upwind.
Yeah, this is going to be a tight mark rounding for these guys, and if they can keep their noses clean and keep their boat speed up, because really good manoeuvre there. If they had rights coming in there from the German team to get inside that New Zealand team, that was a brilliant manoeuvre.
Well, I think the Kiwis had to give the Germans room, and I think the Kiwis were a little bit worried that maybe they hadn't given them enough room. I think the greater concern there was on the New Zealand boat for a moment. But we'll have to see if there's a protest out of that. But at least Germany got what it wanted out of it, which is the more windward track of those two boats as they come towards us.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's Germany 3 that we're speaking about there, Tim Fischer and Fabian Graf. They have 3 because they were third at the World Championships last year, but they haven't really managed to put together the best regatta so far this week. They were sitting 20th overall this morning, but they did have a second place at the final race of yesterday, so we know that they sort of like these light air conditions.
If you look, slight change attack out to the far side. Denmark, is that Denmark 30? Because if it is Denmark 30, they did that early jibe set. If it is that Danish boat, then they have made an enormous gain by doing so, but I can't confirm yet whether that is them.
The tracker shows them as 7th, and yeah, I think you're right. They rounded about 20th at the top mark. They were doing well at the pin, then they kind of sailed at the middle, dropped back to the pack, then rounded the top mark deep, and were the only boat that we saw jibe set, and it didn't look good at the time, but you're right, big gains there.
Well, they rounded with Burling and Chuk. So Burling and Chuk, NZL 77 will be the measure of just what a gain Denmark 30 has made, and with the great benefit of hindsight, NZL 77 and those other boats that did the straight set will be kicking themselves for the missed opportunities picked up by doing that jibe set by Denmark.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing in these conditions. There really are so many opportunities out there to make gains because it is so light and patchy that, we said yesterday with being back in the pack, if you maybe split from the fleet, you're going to make gains because you're going to be able to sail your VMG and you're going to be able to keep your boat speed higher than people deep in the pack. This looks like a bit of a bundle coming up around this leeward mark. We'll have to see who manages to get round with clean air and keeping their boat speed high coming out on the next upwind.
We talked about the Phillips brothers earlier. Oz 66 there. They did have the best day on the water yesterday. They're kind of just in the middle of this pack here. We still can't see the Kiwis that we were speaking about earlier. It looks like maybe just above the Swiss boat, stuck in the middle and kind of the awful, awful position in the middle of everyone.
Oh, this is just the most painful position if you're just behind this pack because there's no way to get around them, and it's so light right now. You just have to wait, and we're just watching the rest of the fleet sail away from you and watching the boats behind catch you up. So yeah, being in this situation is pretty stressful.
So you can also see the Spanish there, orange, that's Germans. But just above that orange kite is where the New Zealanders 77 are, sandwiched between Argentina and Germany, rounding the left-hand mark, headed to the right side upwind. And again, I know we saw the leaders go that way, and we saw a couple people make decisions to go that way, but I really think there doesn't look like there's that much breeze out there on that right side with the pack who've gone upwind, and it maybe is a better situation coming out to the left. We'll have to see when we're able to actually see the rest of the fleet going forward, who's done well so far, but I don't know, Hannah, I'm thinking maybe the left on this one.
Yeah, I don't know. I think looking at the angle of that American boat that's tacked quite soon after this mark at the front of the screen, I think perhaps that other leeward mark was biased because I think the Argentinian boat just in picture near the right-hand side of the screen rounded behind the American boat, and they look like they've extended, and if they tack will be ahead. So potentially that mark was biased, and that's why there was a bit more of a battle for it.
We're seeing Germany 59 just coming around the mark ahead of the Spanish. If you remember just a leg ago, Germany 59 taking that horrible penalty turn, taking an age to do it. And the Spanish weren't having a great race, but they were ahead of Germany 59. So the Spanish have just had an awful run just now by comparison with the Germans, Justus Schmidt and Max Blum, who are in 5th overall coming into today. So there's a mini battle going on there between Germany and Spain.
Yeah, and they just had no wind, did they, at that leeward mark? They were barely moving. But we're back on our race leaders, GBR6, Dylan Fletcher and Stuart Bithell, who at the moment are having a pretty easy time of it.
Yeah, I'm sure it still feels, well, I would be tense. Maybe they're not. I don't think Stu Bithell does tense, does he?
No. Or if he does, he hides it pretty well with a bit of banter.
I think Dylan Fletcher's capable of tense, but he's got Stu Bithell to defray any tension and keep them focused on what they're doing. And this is a far cry from the 50 knots of Sail GP racing they were doing in San Francisco just about a week ago. But it shows how versatile they are. Can sail at less than 5 knots and they can sail at 50 knots.
Yeah, I think it's pretty incredible to jump between these two boats. They are pretty different, as you said, and for Dylan and Stu, that was their first time sailing a catamaran, or not Stuart, but Dylan anyway, particularly a foiling catamaran. So yeah, the F50's been a big learning curve for these boys, but they're very used to the 49er. They've done a lot of hours separately and as a team. So yeah, we're really seeing them put their sort of stamp on this fleet in this light wind final fleet race.
And Dylan Fletcher able to get his feet onto the side of the boat, not quite straight-legged, but at least he's got a bit of power there on port tack as they sail out towards the right-hand side of the course.
having done a little bit of math here on the side, if Dylan and Stewart are able to take this race, which it kind of looks like they're running away with, Pete and Blair's worst at this point is a 19. So that was their last race yesterday. If they get an 18th and Dylan and Stewart win this race, they will be tied going into the medal race, which is spectacular considering that is about the positioning that they are in the race course. So for race fans out there who want to see a really close medal race, we kind of want the Kiwis to stay in that 18th or worse. We kind of want to see that medal race to be that tight. And then, unfortunately, the pack then behind is opening up a little bit with James and Finn getting about an eighth or so. They'll be 15 points back. And with Diego and Iago, the Spaniards, having a deep race here, they'll probably be counting their 16th. Again, their throwout was the last race yesterday, and counting their 16th would put them on 97, so that's about an 18-point spread. So an amazing turn of events here for the Brits to be taking this with the Spanish and the Kiwis so deep really changes how this medal race might look and how the medals might look going into it later today. But that's just a slight update on the scores, and I think realistically you can see here the British lead and the far left boat there on screen. Their only concern in some ways, Hannah, is these Swedes out to the left, but it doesn't look like a huge concern.
I don't think it's a massive one. No, I think you look at the angle of Dylan and Stu's boat on the left-hand side of the screen. They're really lifted on starboard there compared to these Swedish, and we can see the Swedish tack to make the most of that port shift that they're in. But it just goes to show how shifty and patchy it is across the course, because kind of all the boats are pointing at different angles. So it really is challenging out there for all of them.
Well, here's the top mark. You can see an orange band around it means we did have a mark change for the upwind there, but I don't think that's affected Dylan and Stewart very, very happily rounding the top mark for the last time for this race. And looking behind them, they've only just extended their lead, and I think they're probably keeping an eye on the Kiwis and the Spanish and going, they won't know what this means for the medal race, and we won't know until the finish line of the people deeper in the pack, of course, but they're going to feel like they've done everything they could do.
Exactly, and that's all you can do as a sailor, is control your own destiny, and for them they've done that, and they've absolutely executed so far anyway. One more leg to go, but a fantastic race plan, and really awesome to see them deliver on this really tricky race course. And I think if you were New Zealand 77, Pete and Blair, you might feel a little bit frustrated that sort of such a light, tricky race has been held when you've already had 19 fantastic races. And for sure, I can't speak for them, but I think I would personally feel a little bit frustrated and hard done by that this race was held, because it is really light. But ultimately, the winner needs to be the person that can contend with any conditions. So, we've had it all this week.
So, if for them to be frustrated, does that mean that Dylan and Stu have been lucky as well? I mean, obviously they wanted the pin end, they fought for it and they got it, but did they also get a shift soon after the start that they couldn't have predicted, and that was the bit of luck that put them in such a commanding position so early on in the race? Yeah,
it's so hard for us to say here, because before the start they'll have all got their compass numbers and the shift range of what they were seeing out on the water. So for all we know, it could have been in a right-hand shift on the start line, so that they knew the likelihood was a left-hand shift was coming down. So actually they were just putting themselves in the most likely place to really gain from that. So it's really hard for us to say, but ultimately what they did do is put themselves on the edge, and we know that's good when it's light winds.
Yeah, and I think we can remember back to the start, the boats we were talking about at the start were Dylan and Stewart at the pen, and we're Sweden 21 up the middle of the line. And to see those two boats be first and second here, that kind of lets us know we weren't talking about the Kiwis, we weren't talking about the Spaniards, they weren't getting off the line. And that's the kind of the first step of racing and doing well, is make sure you have executed that start. And I think perhaps that's some of the surprise, is that they just didn't come out and execute on the day.
Denmark 30 was another one I think that was the boat that was stopping Dylan and Stu from tacking when they wanted to. So when they tacked, Dylan and Stu were able to tack as well. So the Danish were equally able to have a really good first beat. They didn't have a great first beat. They rounded deep in the pack. They did the jibe set. Will they do the jibe set this time? No, they won't. They'll do the carry on, whereas Sweden has done the jibe set. But it will be in Jonas Vara's mind that the jibe set was a very strong move, and sailing into the middle of Portland Harbour was really... So there we see him do that jibe. So an attacking move by Jonas Vara, who wants to see... He's already doing pretty well. He's what, about 8th or 9th in this race at the moment. Maybe he thinks he can do better by jibing off again and going into the middle of the course. And James Peters and Finn Sterrett having a really good race here, possibly moving into podium contention. Well, suddenly the trend is for the jibe set. So they more than one boat has noticed just how well the Danes did the previous time by jibing into the middle of the course, and also we've had a change of windward mark as well.
So we've just gotten a little bit of an update from the PRO out there on there were some U flags, some over the earlies, over the start lines in that race, and it sounds like 2 of the 3 boats we've just been talking about having stellar starts, the Sweden 21, who I kept saying, wow, they're really all by themselves in the middle of the line and not worried about line sag. Apparently they should have been worried about line sag, having been unofficially, let me just add that, unofficially having been told that they were over early, as well as Denmark 30. So in our context here, those are points that are between Dylan and Stuart and the Kiwis at the moment. So we actually have heard there was a third boat as well, a French 655. So those are 3 points that might not go the way of the Kiwis, which might then mean that they're ending up, if they look like they're 18th across the line, they'd only be, say, 15th, which would maybe put them back into the first place. That's a lot of math, I know, you guys, I'm sorry, but we will try to stay on top of it to let you know how that's going. But you can see the Kiwis here, not New Zealand 34, that's younger team, but New Zealand 77. It actually looks like, Hannah, they've made some gains even on this upwind.
They've made a phenomenal gain from where they were, not really moving at that leeward mark yet, and I think that's a true sign of champions, is to be able to keep calm and to sort of pick your strategy for the next upwind and not try and go for a hero from zero. I'm sure they just picked their way nicely up that beat, using the pressure and sort of sailing around some of their competitors to get back in the mix and to not hemorrhage too many points on our current leaders of this race, Dylan Fletcher and Stuart Bithell.
And again, we said these guys, everything that they can do right now is just win this race and hope that the points behind them go as they will. And so I think for them, this is it. They're looking at the finish line. They've got a nice right shift. They're sailing well. They're probably pretty confident behind them. And this will put them on a good mental advantage in a way, you'd say, Andy, going into the racing later today?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Bowling and Chuk, they haven't really executed in the last 2 races in light conditions. Is that enough to say we've seen a chink in their armour? Well, they're certainly looking mortal. And Dylan and Stu will relish the opportunity to be able to take the fight to the reigning Olympic champions. And definitely the momentum is with GBR6 right now. And NZL 77 going into that medal race will be on the defensive, having gone into the day with a 17-point advantage and almost looking like they had the gold medal in the bag before the medal race. That's no longer the case now.
Yeah, and I mean, I know Dylan and Stu very well, and I know how competitive they are and how much belief they have in themselves, and so they'll absolutely be looking to take this to Pete and Blair, the New Zealand 77 pair, our current leaders overall. So they'll be really, really pleased with this race and be fully up for attacking the medal race this afternoon. So yeah, really looking forward to watching that fight.
Nathan Outridge and Ian Jensen were unstoppable leading up to London 2012. Their voodoo was broken during the Rio 2016. They looked mortal. Now it's up to Dylan and Stu as they are about to cross this line for race victory to prove that they can show that Pete Burling and Blair Chuk are also mortal. That's their challenge for this afternoon. Yeah,
absolutely. But I think we can't get too ahead of ourselves. Pete and Blair have only been back in the boat since all their other incredible exploits after Rio 2016. They've not been back in the boat too long. So I think the next year is going to be really, really interesting to see how this battle pans out.
Well, a hugely well-deserved race win there for Dylan Fletcher and Stuart Bithell, and as we've said, that will stack them up very nicely going into the medal race this afternoon. Looking behind them, such a far way back, it seemed like at this point, to Germany 3, I think, is now in second position. So Tim Fischer and Fabian Graf, they've climbed through the Swedish boats throughout this race course, and of course we said one of the Swedish boats was over early, so while they're still racing out there, their score will not count. So for the third place at the Worlds last year, this will be a good way for them to finish the regatta, because unfortunately it won't be quite enough for them to get into the top 10 overall. So I'm sure just looking forward to the next event after this, Andy.
Yes, they obviously must have been really buoyed by getting third a podium in the Worlds last year, and they would have been hoping to make progress on that this year. They did finish second yesterday afternoon. They're about to finish second now. They're part of a very strong squad of German sailors that work really, really well together. But despite that 3 on their sail, they're not looking one of the most likely to be representing Germany in Tokyo 2020 next year. Still more to learn, and it's one of the other boats that we've been talking about, Justus Schmidt and Max Bohm, who took that penalty earlier, former European champions, Germany 59, still in contention for a good spot here, as are Eric Hull and Tommy Plussel, the bronze medalists from Rio 2016, 6th going into today. We haven't had much to say about them in this race. I don't know where they've been, but they've been quite an invisible boat on this race course today, Hull and Plussel.
Yesterday they had a very up and down day. They won the first race and they followed that with a 22nd and a 20th. So I think we've seen inconsistencies from Heil and Plussel this week. It looks at the moment on the tracker that they're sitting about 21st as well, 17th as well, and Justus Schmidt and Max Bohm sitting 22nd. So those 2 other German teams were only 1 point apart from each other going into this morning in 5th and 6th. And again, there might be some big shakeups here with the rest of the fleet doing well. We should be looking out for the Aussie 66 perhaps moving up into that 5th position, as we know they were doing a little bit better in the racing. But this is Germany 3 well back from 1st position. It's been almost 2 minutes of us chatting since the leaders crossed the line, Hannah, to actually now see Germany 3 take 2nd place.
Yeah, I mean, that's an unbelievable dominant performance by Dylan and Stu in this condition. But we have seen the last couple of days when it is this light and patchy, the leaders do tend to get away because they've just got space and opportunity and time to get their head out of the boat, whereas some of these guys we saw having a bit more of a battle, particularly at the leeward marks and around the race course with other boats, which is very slow, as we've seen. But great result for those guys, a 2nd place to finish. And eyes really out here now for Pete and Blair. New Zealand 77, where are they going to finish? Diego Botin and Iago Lopez, the Spanish boat, who are currently up there as well. We need to keep our eyes peeled for where those guys are going to come in.
And it looks like there's a little battle on between the 2 Swedish boats. You're just seeing them crossing at the moment, Sweden 21 and Sweden 16. So the information we got from the race committee was that it was Sweden 21 who was UFD earlier. That's Fritjof Hedström and Otto Hemmel. And I think, unfortunately for those guys, they will be the ones crossing the line, it looks like, in 3rd position. So it won't be until after that at some point that they'll either be informed or maybe even not. Maybe your coach just lets you sail ashore. Think about it later, because they won't either have made the medal racing. They were sitting 21st and 22nd, those 2 teams going into today. So maybe you just let them live on the glory and deal with the rest during the pack up later on tonight.
It's a tough moment to find out that race didn't count for anything, especially when you cross the line in 3rd place. If there's any consolation, the Swedes generally, both in the 49er FX, the women and the men, they seem to be coming on strong. I've never really thought of Sweden as a particularly strong nation in the skiffs, but they do seem to be making moves in the skiff now, both in the male and the female fleets.
Yeah, it's been really impressive to see, but we've got a really tight finish here from Sweden 16 and Denmark 30, who we also have been unofficially told were over the start line. So unfortunately this race might not count for those guys either.
So Sweden 16, well done. Crossing line 4th means they've got the 3rd overall. And again, with the other 2 boats over early, we're now only sitting on 3 race results across. So that will put Poland 42 into 4th position here. Maybe they're crossing 6th, but they'll score a 4th. Poland on the scores is a little bit deeper than the top 10 at the moment. Apologies, they're in 9th, so they'll take that 4th, and in fact they'll take that happily, knowing so many boats are behind them. So that might move them up, but they had 134 points going into this morning, so they were quite far back from the medals. They might just be looking to move ahead of the New Zealand 7 or Oz 66 team, so let's see where they go. But here's the 2nd GBR 5, and fitting that they have a 5 on their sail as they're finishing 5th here across the line, and then New Zealand 18. So good spot there for James and Finn to be finishing 5th, Hannah.
Yeah, definitely, and they'll be looking behind them to see where our 3rd place overall Spanish boat are going to finish, because the points are really starting to get tight between those 2 boats now after this final fleet race. Unfortunately, they've lost a little bit of distance on their British rivals, Dylan and Stu. But yeah, we're going to have to see how the overalls look after this race for these guys, because I think for third place we might have a really strong battle on our hands between the Spanish and the British GBR5.
Peters and Sterrett do get a couple of free places on Fletcher and Bithell because of the 2 disqualifications from UFD flags, so that does close the gap a little bit, but that's looking a struggle for them to fully close the gap for gold. There's the French 655, also the third of those UFD disqualification boats, really close up on the line at the start time, so no surprise to me that they were pinged from that. And that's Josh Perebski and Trent Rippey from New Zealand with the red kite just crossing the finish line. So seen a couple of Kiwis cross, but we haven't seen the Kiwis that we care about the most. New Zealand 77 still to come in.
I think what's interesting is how big a split there is between what is about 10 boats we've had finish now and the rest of the pack, and it looks almost like these boats maybe just got round one of the marks and got into some pressure and extended, and the boats or the pack behind didn't quite get that pressure, and so there's a big split in the fleet, which has made it really challenging for the New Zealanders and the Spanish to make any sort of a big comeback. You know, all they can have done is to try and get into contention at the front of this group.
So I think this blue flag this blue spinnaker coming into shot here is going to be the Kiwis. So we have seen 6 boats across the line scoring wise. GBR 17 is going to be the 7th boat across the line for results. So I think we are actually seeing a massive comeback here for Blair and Pete on board New Zealand 77. If they can just get across the bows of Germany 4, then I think they're only going to be scoring, what is that, eighth point. So well done for them. At points we were saying they might be tied and possibly second going into the medal race, and by scoring an 8th they're going to still have a decent lead going into the racing later today.
Amazing comeback, absolutely amazing comeback. So what have the Spanish managed to do? We need to see if they've managed to make any inroads. New Zealand 7 crossing the line, surely that's all the Kiwis. It seems to be a lot of Kiwi traffic out there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was an absolutely phenomenal comeback from Pete and Blair, and I think you wouldn't expect anything less from a deep mark rounding in this final fleet race. The pressure was on. And here we've got the Spanish boat coming through as well. So actually a pretty good comeback from those guys, because they were really deep, even behind Pete and Blair at that first win with Mark.
I think also we just saw Germany 4 squeeze in through there in between, so finishing 9th there for Eric Heil and Thomas Possel. We said they were sitting 6th going into today, but they had the ability to maybe move up to 5th, so that will have moved them up to 5th at the moment. And yeah, a really good comeback for Spain to be able to at least kind of stay in the medal punch. We'll have to rejig the scores on this end. I do think that has them drop to 4th, but let me just check that out in general, and we'll take a look. Aussies, the Phillips brothers crossing the line as well.
Yeah, and that's maybe a bit disappointing for those guys, because they were pretty up there, I think.
Yes, they were.
Around that first mark. So a bit of a shame for those guys in this race to not consolidate that into another good result.
So yeah, a lot of place changing, and unlike yesterday when Australia 66 were the best performing boat of the day, yesterday, including winning one of the races by a country mile, not such a good finish there by the Phillips brothers, but they should still have done enough, I would have thought, to make it into the medal race this afternoon. But you, Hannah, yesterday you were talking about, wouldn't it be great if you could go on a lapse time and just trade some of the distance in one race to spread it across some of your other races? I mean, Fletcher and Bithell had so much time and distance to spare, even on the second place boat, let alone the rest of the fleet.
Yeah, I mean, that win was a really commanding win in that race, and they'll take a lot of confidence for that going into the medal race this afternoon. They've clearly got good boat speed and good boat handling, as we saw in these conditions. They attacked the race from the start. They won that pin end. They waited for their opportunity of the left shift. They took it when they could, and they sailed just a really nice consolidatory race after that from there on in.
I think we've got, again, unofficial updated scores. So thanks a lot to Ben Riemacher and some of the hardworking team here to try to let us know exactly what we think is it going to look like going into the medal racing this afternoon. But we have had some mix-ups on the scoreboard. As we said, Pete and Blair are continuing in the lead with 71 points now. So a really well-executed comeback for those guys during the race. And as we said, Dylan Fletcher and Stuart Bithell doing all that they could do to take the race win and just let the rest play out behind them as they could. So that puts them on 81 points going into the medal race, just 10 points back. And as we know, medal race, double points. It could only be 5 places, and that easily could happen. As we've seen here, there were 5 places between the two of them in the 1st and 8th. Sitting in 3rd now, so that means they've moved up from 4th position overnight. The 2nd British team of the 49er men's, James Peters and Finn Sterrett, with a good 5th place there to put them on 94 points altogether. So they are out of the running for 1st place, but still very much in the running for 2nd position. And then, of course, that means that has dropped the Spanish from 3rd place this morning into 4th, but it is very, very close, just 3 points in it between those two. So easily the Spaniards could regroup, get back into medal touch, and then I think actually realistically the math has Germany 4th and 59. They have switched positions, so that's now Eustace Schmidt and Max Bowen dropping to 6th, and Eric Heil and Thomas Plossel moving up to 5th. But since they sit on 122 and 127, there's not really any movement there at all. So that's going to be the top 4 duking it out for the medal points in the men's racing later today.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good scenario. I have to say, as a neutral and also as a British fan, I would love to have seen a little bit of a tighter points gap between New Zealand and GBR6, but fair play to Burling and Tuke. They came back, they held their nerve, and that final run to the finish, they made up valuable points there when they needed to the most.
Yeah, that was, I think, for them, that was a really, really impressive comeback in that race. They were under a lot of pressure, potentially a bit frustrated that the wind was so light and the race course was so tricky, and maybe feeling maybe this race shouldn't have run at all. So to get your head out of that frame of mind and to keep looking forward and to keep looking for those opportunities to overtake boats and as I said, not trying to do the hero manoeuvre and just bang a corner, which we didn't see them do. You know, they just picked off boats, and that's a real sign of true champions.
I think we have to give it to the Spanish as well for having done basically the same. We saw them 22nd at points. Remember when they were coming in on port tack, almost dead last. So to have moved up through the fleet, and yes, they did drop to 4th overall, but it is very close with just 3 points in it. So well done to both those teams to keep their heads screwed on straight, and well done to the Brits to take as many points as they can at the moment. So that's it for now for the 49er Gold Fleet final race. As we've said, later on this afternoon, less than 2 hours away, I think, 2 p.m. is meant to be the 49er FX women's medal racing. That is a very tight battle as well, although it looks like out in the front a little bit running away with it. So 19 points. They could still lose if something bad was to happen, like a disqualification over and over early, but it possibly is Martina Grail and Kayana Kunz as well. It is theirs to lose. And yet the battle behind them is very, very close. And the most important battle, I think we've spoken about it a lot yesterday and in our write-ups and in general this week, but the battle is for Netherlands 1 to make sure that they get their Olympic qualification, and they have to secure 3rd or better. Is that correct,
That's
Andy?
what we believe. I mean, if they finish 3rd here, then they would be tied under the Dutch trial system with Adil van Aanholt and Marika Jongens, who got 1st in Genoa, the first of the 2 trial events. But apparently, in the event of a tie, what happens in Weymouth trumps what happened in Genoa. So it's really, really close, because Annemiek Bekkering, the reigning world champion, and Annette Doets, they're on 75 points. Yes, gold is pretty much gone. They're in silver, but it's only, 6 points. That's just 3 places back to the Swedes, Vilma Bobeck and Malin Tengström. And on equal points with the Swedes are the Norwegians, the reigning European champions, Helene Nice and Marie Ronningen. So, and you can go further back than that. I mean, there's really, from 2nd to 6th, the points are extremely tight. So there's no opportunity really for match racing there, and I don't think we need to see the Brazilians get involved in that, do we? Hannah, what would you do?
I think with a 19-point lead, it's entirely yours to lose. You can only lose that if you get over the start line, which means you get 22 points on your score, or a black flag for a really bad infringement around the racecourse that the jury deemed just so unfair that they've disqualified you from the entire race. So yeah, there's not too much that can go wrong, or of course if they have a breakage and they don't finish the race, but in these light winds I think that's highly unlikely. So yeah, totally theirs to lose, and I think they'll just try and sail their own race clear of the battle going on for silver and bronze behind them.
Can I just put a scenario to you? I'm not for one moment going to suggest that the Brazilians are going to do this, but the good reason why the British and other trials are kept quiet.
I knew this was coming my way, Andy.
is because you don't want to reveal to the rest of the world what the scenarios are for your Olympic trials. Now, if the Brazilians decided that they didn't want Netherlands 1, the reigning world champions, to go to the Olympic Games next year, they have an opportunity here to camp on the Netherlands boat and push them out of contention, drop them down below the podium here, and that potentially could drop the reigning world champions out of their Olympic trials, and you potentially shut out one of your rivals for a medal at Tokyo 2020 next year. Are the Dutch naive to have the trial system that they do and make it so public?
There's a lot of questions in there. I think as a true journalist, you've really hit me with the tough question there. But I think for sure the Brazilians could look at that situation and go, actually, we're going to take Netherlands 1, Annemiek and Annette, down the pack outside of third position, or try to, purely thinking about Tokyo 2020. But I just think, as competitors, that is a very, very big call to make from that team. I think I can't speak for them. I think they'll do what they want to do. But for the Dutch to have that open trial system, it does bring that into question, because we're now talking about it, and it's a real possible opportunity for the Brazilians. And if we didn't know that this was part of the trials, it never would come into question. So it's a call each country has to make about their trial system, and the British are obviously very closed about it, and the Dutch are very open, and maybe it just adds to the pressure for Netherlands 1, knowing that everybody knows. I don't know. So I think it's going to be a really interesting medal race, and we'll have to watch how it plays out.
Well, I just want to say thank you, Netherlands, for at least being open with your trial system, because it gives us something to talk about. We speculate about some of the other trials and the scenarios. We don't really know what's going on, but we've got a fairly good handle on what's going on with this really exciting duel going on between the two Dutch teams.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there might be some real scenarios that perhaps don't allow the other countries to get involved in such a way. We'll look into that a little bit between now and the medal racing, just so we're totally clarified on what that is. But I think it's fun to ask a Brit with a very, very secretive... the Americans have a very open system as well. We know exactly what the trials events, as do all the rest of the countries. So yeah, as you're saying, you could somehow possibly mess with them if the rules allow it. But that's the 49er women. That's going to be an interesting race. We also have a really, really exciting Nacra race coming up this afternoon. And again, what we think it will be is the 49er FX first, and then the Nacras, and then the men, the 49ers. But the Nacras, Hannah, really tight.
Oh, it's going to be absolutely fantastic to watch. For us, getting our heads around the maths, as we can see here, I think only 9 points separates the top 5 or 6 boats, or 12 points separates the top 6 boats, and 9 points the top 5. So it really is anyone's game for that, and it's going to be hard to defend. It's going to be hard to not just go and try and win the race, to be honest, and for the Italians in the lead, they've got to attack, because even if they try and sail Ben Saxton and Nicola Boniface in second down a little bit, they've got 3 other boats to worry about. So yeah, it's going to be really exciting for us to watch.
I would have thought very difficult boats to go sort of boat on boat with as well. But what do you think about that, Jenny, being the match racer that you were, one of the best in the world when you were campaigning for London 2012? How would you fancy your chances of being able to match race in a foiling catamaran?
Yeah, I mean, I think Hannah's got the point nailed. Is it's not a match race, because there are other boats involved, and there are other boats very, very close to the scoreline. So if we were to say a match race in foiling catamarans, who would be the best at that? Well, let's look at the bottom of those scores, who's just snuck into the medal racing yesterday, and I think if we were to see a match race, the person who's done so much of that recently in foiling catamarans is Nathan Outteridge. And the fact that he's new to the Nacra, new to sailing with his sister, maybe new to this foiling cat, doesn't necessarily mean that he doesn't have the experience of 2 medals behind him, Hannah. So you were expecting to see them further up the scores earlier this week, and they've kind of just gotten into it.
Yeah, I think, as you said, all those points are really valid. They're fairly new to sailing together and sailing this type of foiling catamaran. So great for them to scrape into the medal race. I know they will have wanted to be higher up, but the conditions at the start of the week, I was speaking to Nathan briefly yesterday, and they just weren't prepared for the big wind and waves. They've not done enough time in the boats compared to the rest of the fleet in those conditions. So it was a pretty big struggle for them at the start of the week, and I think that they've got a lot to prove to try and beat their Australian teammates, Lisa Darmanin and Jason Waterhouse, to the Olympic Tokyo 2020 spot. So yeah, we're going to really have to watch that Australian battle as we get on through this season.
Okay, well, we're going to have to watch all of the battles this afternoon. We are now almost an hour and a half away from what we expect to be the 49er FX medal race, as we said, followed by the Nacras, and then the 49er men. We did just see good racing out there. The breeze is a little lighter than we would have hoped at the moment, but it's meant to build, Hannah.
It's supposed to build. I mean, the weather gods hopefully will play ball, and we'll have a little bit more wind for this afternoon's medal races, so fingers crossed.
Well, they've played ball so far. There's sun out there. It doesn't often happen necessarily in England.
It does. It does.
Please join us soon in an hour and a half. Make sure if you need to be reminded, you can subscribe to 49er.org/subscribe, or you subscribe to our YouTube channels, and you'll hear it when we go live. But otherwise, join us here at 2 p.m.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen around the world, for tuning in. Thank you. These fastest of the Olympic boats. We're 10 seconds to go to the start here. Great action here. Some of the world's best sailors on board. Top performing boat. Look at that France 81, the big foil. Whoa, the boat flying out of the water.